So, on our previous session, we read about the body as a means of communication. Turns out the Holy Spirit can recruit the body for its own purposes of using it as a communication device. In this session, we'll look at a continuation of that theme, but with more focus on what is the purpose of the body. Is it a means to some other goal, or is it an end in itself? And as you might expect, the Holy Spirit and the ego are split on this matter. Hello and welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader today is David S. I'm sorry, David W. is our reader today. Oh my. Pardon me, David. You're muted, brother.
Eight, the body as means or end. Attitudes toward the body are attitudes towards attack. The ego's definitions of anything are childish and are always based on what it believes the thing is for. This is because it is incapable of true generalizations and equates what it sees with the function it ascribes to it. It does not equate it with what it is. To the ego, the body is to attack with. Equating you with the body, it teaches that you are to attack with. Body then is not the source of its own health. The body's condition lies solely in your interpretation of its function. Functions are part of being since they arise from it. The relationship is not reciprocal. The whole does define the part does not define the whole. Yet to know in part is to know entirely because of the fundamental difference between knowledge and perception. In perception, the whole is built up of parts that can separate and reassemble in different constellations. But knowledge never changes, so its constellation is permanent. The idea of part-whole relationships has meaning only at the level of perception, where change is possible. Otherwise, there is no difference between the part and the whole.
So clearly there's a lot there, and we want to spend a few extra moments getting oriented in this first paragraph here. So we know that the ego wants to control, particularly to prompt your mind with ideas using its thought system. So the ego's definitions will be prompted in our mind. The ego will attempt to define for you what the body is for. It's based on what the ego belief system. However, we know that the ego's beliefs are poorly founded. It doesn't really understand anything. And so the ego believes the body is to be used to attack. This is consistent with the idea of a fearful thought system. If you're afraid how you're going to respond, I'm going to respond with my body with physical aggression. This is also consistent with the well-known fight or flight response mechanism of adrenaline that causes one to either flee or to stand and fight. So the ego is very much wrapped in around that instinctual mechanism because it equates and it wants you to buy into this belief. it does equate you with the body. And therefore, since it believes that the body is for attack, it teaches that you are for aggression, hostility. Um, and as a result of all this, let's really try to understand these last two sentences in this portion of the paragraph. The body then is not the source of its own health. Its condition lies solely in your interpretation of its function. So and that involves an interpretation of what does that mean. The body does not define what it is for. It is not the source of self-definition. The body just goes along for the ride. Your mind decides what the body is for. However, the ego would have you believe this is different, is flipped, and try to have you have a body centric point of view. In truth, the body and its role, its function lies solely in your interpretation of its function. And that is the subject of this session, is your interpretation of the body's function. Before we can understand that about the body, a couple comments about functions in a broad sense. There are many functions. We'll make a few comments about the broad use of functions in the Course of Miracles. Functions really are what something are for. And in truth, functions come from the nature of your eternal being. You were created for a purpose, and your functions naturally arise from the purpose you were created for. However, this relationship of function to being is not reciprocal, meaning your function does not determine your being, but your being does determine your function. And this is the truth, but the ego would have you believe it differently. The ego would have you believe that you should begin with your body, figure out what it's for, and then generalize that belief about the body to everything about you. So the whole does not define the part. The whole does define, pardon me, the part, but the part does not define the whole. The whole plan of creation does define all the parts within it, but never do individual separate parts define the whole plan of creation. And this confusion regarding these relationships is the essence of the difference between knowledge and perception. So, a deeper dive for a moment. Perception takes a little part of a little part, meaning a perception of a small thing. Let's say your perception of being a human being in the 20th century, 21st century, and then attempts to create a grand narrative while starting from a small sense of perception. That's false perception. Whereas knowledge starts from the big picture, what is the plan of creation, and then sees all the parts as belonging and serving in that plan of creation. So this is relevant to what we'll read about today, because your body, viewed from the Holy Spirit's perspective, your body serves the function that was given it by the plan of creation, whereas the ego wants you to believe the opposite of that is true. We'll go on.
The body exists in a world that seems to contain two voices fighting for its possession. In this perceived constellation, the body is seen as capable of shifting its allegiance from one to the other, making the concepts of both health and sickness meaningful. The ego makes a fundamental confusion between means and end, as it always does. Regarding the body as an end, the ego has no real use for it because it is not an end. You must have noticed an outstanding characteristic of every end that the ego has accepted as its own. When you have achieved it, it has not satisfied you. This is why the ego is forced to shift ceaselessly from one goal to another, so that you will continue to hope it can yet offer you something.
Let's focus on that very last phrase. The ego would encourage you to continue to hope that the ego can offer you something that you want, even after you've attained what it offered you and found that you were still lacking. And there's so many examples of this in life. At first, I thought I should be popular, and I became popular, and I was still not satisfied. Then I decided I should build my body up to make it strong and attractive, and I did that, and I was still not satisfied. And then I decided I would make a lot of money so that I could be happy, and I did that, and I was still found things missing in my life. So it's the nature of the ego to continue to shift the goals from one to another. And what they all have in common is an external source of validation. If I do these things outwardly in the world, then I will find this is an illusion of fulfillment. Then I'll be happy. When the Course would say, you do not find happiness externally, you find it internally, and then share your internal happiness with others. That's the nature of extension. You found it deep within, and then you share it with others. That's what happiness is. The ego would have us continue to hope to find it externally. Heather?
Yeah, the ego's song is seek but do not find. That's what the Course says.
Seek but do not find. It reminds me of being on a treadmill, maybe a hamster wheel. Just keep working hard. You'll get there eventually. And yet the hamster wheel or the treadmill goes nowhere. Okay, so this is, again, let's bring it back to the more general problem, is the ego makes a fundamental confusion between means and end, referring to the ego is not aware of the real goal, and so it assigns things like the body to being the goal. It sees the body as an end in itself, whereas the Holy Spirit obviously believes in a different outcome, a different goal, a different plan, and she sees the body merely as a means. It's merely, and what should be obvious, the body is a temporary means to a goal. It only lasts as long as the organic flesh survives this lifetime. It's so very temporary. We'll go on.
It has been particularly difficult to overcome the ego's belief in the body as an end, because it is synonymous with the belief in attack as an end. The ego has a profound investment in sickness. You are sick. How can you object to the ego's firm belief that you are not invulnerable. This is an appealing argument from the ego's point of view because it obscures the obvious attack that underlies the sickness. If you recognized this and also decided against attack, you could not give this false witness to the ego's stand.
Mm-hmm. So, in many ways, the author is cautioning us, those who are reading and pursuing this program, about the difficulty in letting go of the ego's belief in the body as the goal. So just realize that's a big one to undo. And later on, chapter 19, when we get into the obstacles to peace, we'll realize the whole fear around physical death of the body is a major obstacle that stands in the way of completing this course. And that when we free ourselves from identification with the body, from identification with the ego, we see it only as a means, a temporary means to achieve a purpose. Only then can we become free of the fear of death and thus truly free. So until then, the ego is a profound investment in mental sickness, in a delusional system, a deranged type of thinking whose priorities are all upside down. And if you are confused yourself, how can you object to the ego's belief systems? If so, this program is about bringing understanding and clarity, highlighting the ego's insanity of its point of view, removing those obstacles, when thus removing the barriers to the mind's state of inner peace and harmony. So that's how we become free. This is familiar. We've read this before. David?
It is hard to perceive sickness as a false witness because you do not realize that it is entirely out of keeping with what you want. This witness, then, appears to be innocent and trustworthy because you have not seriously cross-examined him. If you had, you would not consider sickness such a strong witness on behalf of the ego's views. A more honest statement would be that those who want the ego are predisposed to defend it. Therefore, their choice of witnesses should be suspect from the beginning. The ego does not call upon witnesses who would disagree with its case, nor does the Holy Spirit. I have said that judgment is the function of the Holy Spirit, and one he is perfectly equipped to fulfill. Ego as a judge gives anything but an impartial judgment. When the ego calls on a witness, it has already made the witness an ally.
Mm-hmm. So introduce the term here that'll be used again throughout in other chapters called witness. And it's using it in a certain way that we want to try to understand, or else our minds would be confused. What does the ego use as a witness? And I would suggest that you think of a witness as a thought or feeling that arises in your mind that confirms the ego's beliefs. And in my walk this morning, the example that came to me was, let's say you walk into a store or a room and there's someone there who when you look at them, you decide you can't trust them, you're afraid. Well, that would be the ego calling a witness, your attention to a witness for its thought system. At that moment, you have a choice of whether or not to subscribe to that judgment that this person's not trustworthy. This could be a person you've never met. Or you can deny that witness being called. So think of it that way. It can also be in the form of a false feeling. Remember, we're talking about the example of a false witness. And so this is done constantly. Why? Because we've not seriously examined it says cross-examine these witnesses. We've not seriously looked at these ego promptings to judge against someone and cross-examine them. If we had, we would not be so readily willing to join with the ego's view. It would be better to say, I really don't know. I don't know what anything is for. But I do know that the Holy Spirit has a plan and that all situations are lessons in which God would have me learn. That would be a more truthful statement. And so know that the ego always is labeling individuals and thoughts and feelings to witness for its belief. And so it says it does any. These are not impartial judgments. When the ego calls on a witness, it has already made the witness an ally in its belief system. And the perhaps tricky part of this course is to learn that when those impulses, those thoughts and feelings arise in your mind, that doesn't make it true. It certainly doesn't make it trustworthy. In fact, given that the ego always speaks first, it makes it a witness. They makes those thoughts and feelings an ally of the ego. And the very simple plan of healing in this course is to not buy into that judgment, but instead realize that the Holy Spirit is the one to properly assess these situations in life, one that the Holy Spirit is perfectly equipped to fulfill, and we turn towards Holy Spirit for guidance. David?
It is still true that the body has no function of itself because it is not an end. Ego, however, establishes it as an end because as such, its true function is obscured. This is the purpose of everything the ego does. Its sole aim is to lose sight of the function of everything. The sick body does not make any sense. It could not make sense because sickness is not what the body is for. Sickness is meaningful only if the two basic premises on which the ego's interpretation of the body rests are true. That the body is for attack and that you are a body. Without these premises, sicknesses is inconceivable.
Okay, so this latter second half, if one does not recognize level confusion and misunderstands it, then they would read this as saying the body can never be sick. And then your rational mind says, well, wait a minute, I'm on antibiotics for bronchitis. What do you mean my body can't be sick? Of course it can. And then you run into a downward spiral of confusion. So let me offer a reinterpretation of this section based upon level clarity, which says it's not bodies that are sick, it's minds that are sick. A sick body makes no sense. And because sickness is not a condition of the body. Yes, biologically, the body is capable of illnesses and injuries and all manner of biological damage, but that's not what the Holy Spirit is concerned with. Biology. The Holy Spirit is concerned with healing the mind. And that's the body is only a means towards healing the mind, not the end. So, sickness, the illusion of sickness is meaningful only if you believe in two ideas of the ego's belief about the body, and only if they are true. Neither one of them are true. But if you believe they are true, then you'll believe sickness is valid and meaningful. Those premises are, one is that the body's for attack. We know that Holy Spirit would never endorse that. And the second one premise is that your essence of your nature is that you are a body. And we know the Holy Spirit would never endorse that. Without these premises, a sick mind is inconceivable because the mind would not be confused about its nature and it would not be confused about its function. One more statement. Let's see if it just flashed on my mind. Sickness is inconceivable. Oh, this refers to the healed state. The healed state. I know what the thought was. It says in the Principles of Miracles that level confusion is the source of all conflict. All conflict comes from level confusion. Well, we're referring to level confusion in this section. And if you undo the foundations of level confusion, which are one, that you are a body, and two is that your body's for attack, if you undo that, then the entire set of foundational beliefs of the ego's interpretation collapse, and you become clarified about the levels. And then in that state of mind, a sick mind is inconceivable. David, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you emphasized the importance of this issue of level clarity. And we talked about it even last night in our Urantia book meeting that there's three domains: physical, mental, and spiritual domains. They're distinct realms of cosmic reality. And I found it very helpful because for me, I started out in a 12-step program 40 some years ago, and my healing was through the feeling. And as I gradually became more healed, I came to realize that the things that I thought they did to me, they didn't do at all. But I had to go through that sort of, I'm doing a lot of gardening now. So I guess a good metaphor would be a hoe in the mud. I feel like my 12th step was kind of loosening the soil. And then I could really examine all these different mind levels. But what really helped me was being able to shift from my physical bodily experience here and realize all that stuff is true on that level. but there's another level of who I really am that is so much more important. And I didn't have a breakthrough until I realized I have to completely shift levels. Because on one level, it's all happening, and on another level, it's not. And it's not on the level I'm on right now. I'm so happy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. One of the things that David just said is that in the program 12 Steps, he learned healing through the feeling. So let's keep that in mind as we read on and see what the Course has to say about that.
I have to add, Jonica, the most important thing this Course has taught me, that if I'm not feeling right, then I need to change my thinking. That's the core of it. Every time I just have to change my thinking, and it's just amazing. It's miraculous. Sickness is a way of demonstrating that you can be heard. It is a witness to your frailty, your vulnerability, and your extreme need to depend on external guidance. Ego uses this as its best argument for your need to avoid its guidance. It dictates endless prescriptions for avoiding catastrophic outcomes. The Holy Spirit, perfectly aware of the same situation, does not bother to analyze it at all. If data are meaningless, there is no point in analyzing them. The function of truth is to collect information that is true. Any way you handle error results in nothing. The more complicated the results become, the harder it may be to recognize their nothingness. But it is not necessary to examine all possible outcomes to which premises give rise in order to judge them truly.
So we all recall what a prescription pad at the doctor's office looks like. This is maybe a little dated, but a smaller pad in which the doctor would write a prescription for a medication. So picture that you've got 1,000 of them, that you've been given 1,000 prescriptions. So the ego dictates endless prescriptions to avoid things that have not happened, catastrophic outcomes that may happen in the future or as a result of the past, or just things that you can worry about, endless prescriptions for worrying. That is a given. That's what the ego does. You can count on it. But your reaction to those prescriptions is what this Course deals with. The Holy Spirit doesn't bother to even read those prescriptions. It realizes they are meaningless and there's no point in evaluating them. For the Holy Spirit is interested in what is true. And any way you examine an illusion results in nothing that is true. And so the ego attempts to make it more complicated to get your attention. The more complicated the results become, the harder it may be to recognize that they're not true. But this is not necessary. But here's the thing that will save you hours, if not years of your life. It is not necessary to examine all possible outcomes up to these endless prescriptions of the ego. In fact, the sooner you learn the habit, the new habit of quickly identifying the ego's witnesses, its promptings, as merely a needless prescription, the quicker you can say, I don't need that. I don't need another prescription from the ego, and discard it without even reading it. And so I'm being a little bit poetic here, metaphoric in this, but you know what I mean. I'm talking about thoughts that arise in your mind. An example that comes to me is some friends were getting ready to travel for a week, get on a plane and travel. And of course, they don't know exactly how the trip is going to go. And so one of the things that will happen is your mind will start attempting to fill in what you don't know about the future. Oh, this could happen, that could happen, that could happen, that could happen. True. And to analyze that and then get yourself all worked up about it, that's how the ego would attempt to keep your attention focused on nothingness. David?
A learning device is not a teacher. It cannot tell you how you feel. You do not know how you feel because you have accepted the ego's confusion, and you therefore believe that a learning device can tell you how you feel. Sickness is merely another example of your insistence on asking guidance of a teacher who does not know the answer. The ego is incapable of knowing how you feel. When I said that the ego does not know anything, I said the one thing about the ego that is wholly true. But there is a corollary. If only knowledge has being, and the ego has no knowledge, then the ego has no being.
Mm-hmm. So this brings us to a topic that might be controversial. David a moment ago shared his experience and how in the program he was taught healing through the feeling. Okay, so so let's just assume that you know what we're talking about there. Now I want to present another angle on it that comes from the Course of Miracles. And it's when the ego is involved and you have an immediate response to a situation, a feeling arises. Well, what is said here is certainly the ego cannot tell you how you will feel, although it will try. The truth is, from this perspective, you don't know, you don't truly know how you feel because of accepting the ego's confusion into your mind and then trying to interpret your feelings based on the ego's confusion. And you therefore believe that the body can tell you how you feel. Again, we're not talking about, like, if I have a pain in my knee, it twists my knee the other day and I feel the pain in it. We're not talking about a sensation in the biological domain. We're talking about an emotional response to a situation or a thought or a belief, such as I'm about to travel. What if I get killed? How do I feel about dying if the plane doesn't make it on the other end? We're talking about emotional responses, not physiological responses. So if we're confused by the ego, then we're looking towards understanding our feelings, to looking towards the body for understanding our feelings. And so this is an example of asking guidance of a teacher who does not know the answer. And most people that practice the Course for a while, that makes perfect sense, that we cannot look to the ego for explaining how we feel and helping us to understand our feelings. Because the ego is incapable of true understanding about how you feel, although it has plenty of propaganda, it has plenty of illusions that it will feed you about how you feel, but it doesn't know because the ego doesn't know anything. And therefore, how could it correctly interpret your feelings? There's a corollary to this, which is a bit apart from what we just said, but let me let that what we just said sink in. We are all having emotional responses to situations, to relations, to thoughts and feelings. You don't even have to leave your house to have a feeling regarding how am I doing today? What am I going to do with myself? What am I? All these feelings arise. But if we turn to the ego for an interpretation of those feelings, clearly we are demonstrating confusion and are likely to, let's see, to be given a bag of lies. And then, having been served a bag of lies, if we accept those lies into our mind, well, you can see how that would only cause us to drift further away from understanding and clarity. David?
I just wanted to say that, you know, those feeling those feelings is a necessary step because most people in 12-step programs, their feelings have become frozen and suppressed. So it's important to take a pitchfork just to loosen the soil because the feelings can also be illusions. There can be illusions based on how you're feeling. So I almost feel like the 12-step programs are one of the first steps in healing because they do kind of loosen the soil so that you can start to look at what's underneath it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Certainly, we're not really commenting on how people heal when they're practicing the 12-step program. We are commenting rightfully and keeping ourselves limited to how to heal within this program. And what we find is many people work on the 12 steps for 10 years and make a lot of progress and then find this program. In fact, I'll be the first to tell you that I've noticed people do very well that come from a 12-step background that come into this program. And so what we're saying is the guidance regarding what to pay attention to is now changing here because this is a program that's based on Holy Spirit's guidance, lifting us to a new level in our healing. The final thought here about this corollary to the idea that the ego doesn't know anything is that knowledge, we're talking about divine knowledge, heavenly, eternal knowledge, has comes from the source, from the only source of all reality, and the ego has none of that knowledge. Therefore, the ego has no being. It has no true existence. It has only a shadow, a mirage, a delusion of existence, but it has no true essence. It's nothing but a false belief system. We'll go on.
Might well ask how the voice of something that does not exist can be so insistent. Have you thought about the distorting power of something you want, even if it's not real? There are many instances of how what you want distorts perception. No one can doubt the ego's skill in building up false cases. nor can anyone doubt your willingness to listen until you choose not to accept anything except truth. When you lay the ego aside, it will be gone. The Holy Spirit's voice is as loud as your willingness to listen.
Hmm.
Cannot be louder without violating your freedom of choice, which the Holy Spirit seeks to restore, never to undermine.
Mhm. This whole program is about the Holy Spirit seeking to restore your freedom of choice, your free will, your freedom to live in peace and happiness, to restore that. Um, so it is something that I've heard so many times in from people within the course about the strength of the ego's voice, in truth, the persistence of the ego's voice. It's so insistent. And so it is fair to ask the question, how could something that doesn't exist be so insistent? And it points us directly to the Holy Spirit's answer. It remains insistent only because you feed it, because you give it power. And I don't, let's see, I do have a moment here. Tell the story of two wolves. This is a Native American story. A boy had two wolves, a black wolf and a white wolf. And I wasn't prepared to tell the story. What are the details then? And the black wolf and the white wolf would fight. They had a different nature. And the grandfather said, which one is the one that wins that fight? And the boy said, the one I feed.
Mm.
And so it is with the ego's voice. When we feed it, it wins. It remains insistent and persistent. And we are told to practice vigilance against this, but also not to feed it. So when you lay the ego aside and stop feeding it, it will be gone. And with it being gone, if we pursue only truth, the Holy Spirit's voice will become as loud as we are willing to pursue only truth and not feed the ego. Also, earlier in this session, we talked about the ego calls forth witnesses. Individuals come to mind that would serve as a screen for us to project our ego judgments upon. And we were told not to, that the ego certainly will call forth witnesses, but that we must be alert not to believe in those false witnesses. Also, it told us about endless prescriptions for future calamities, and that we would be best not to analyze those prescriptions, not to lose any time trying to find truth in a false prescription. David?
The Holy Spirit teaches you to use your body only to reach your brothers, so he can teach his message through you. This will heal them and therefore heal you. Everything used in accordance with its function as the Holy Spirit sees it cannot be sick. Everything used otherwise is. Do not allow the body to become a mirror of a split mind. Do not let it be an image of your own perception of littleness. Do not let it reflect your decision to attack. Health is seen as the natural state of everything when interpretation is left to the Holy Spirit, who perceives no attack on anything. Health is the result of relinquishing all attempts to use the body lovelessly. Health is the beginning of the proper perspective on life under the guidance of the one teacher who knows what life is, being the voice for life itself.
Mm-hmm. So they just redefined health. Health is a state of conscious awareness that embodies the proper perspective on life, understands the plan of creation, and our part in the plan of creation, specifically, what is your function here on this world, which is to forgive and to heal. And all that done under the guidance of the Holy Spirit as teacher, who serves as the voice for health, the voice for life itself. And so this is using the body as a means towards this greater end, this plan of salvation. Yes, the body has a temporary role in your existence because you can give your voice and your hand. It talks again and again about your hands and your feet and your eyes and your ears, and particularly your voice, to extend the thoughts and teachings of Holy Spirit. David?
I just wanted to say that for me, A Course in Miracles has been a step-by-step, day-by-day fulfillment of the 12-step promise, because the 12-step promise is about improving my conscious contact. And the only conscious contact I can have is through the Holy Spirit. So this really is the graduate program, I think, in the 12th step. It's a step-by-step, and it's day-by-day lessons that work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. So that's as far as we're going to read. I did have a few summaries for those of you that find that valuable. I've agreed to post these online on my website, so you can go there if you want a copy or a refresher. These will be listed under Chapter 8. We're not going to spend time reviewing them again here because we just talked about them. But throughout the week or at any other time, you're welcome to review them as a reminder of the key highlights of what we talked about today. So, thank you. The body as a means towards being, as a communicator of a plan of forgiveness, is a wonderful message. And I'm so glad we had a chance to share it together. Thank you, David, for stepping in as our reader today. Thank you all for your attention. Look forward to connecting again very soon. Namaste.
Thank you, David.
Namaste.
Peace and love.